Today, my guest is Dr. Bill Wilson, a family practice doctor who practiced frontline medicine in Minnesota and Massachusetts for over 40 years, who was then diagnosed 3 years ago at the Massachusetts General Hospital with mild cognitive impairment, often called pre-dementia. A diagnosis that he has reversed, and we are going to find out how and what he has learned along the way. So, Bill, thank you for joining my podcast.
You're welcome. I'm happy to be here.
So, you're a medical doctor, and in 2024, you were diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment. Now, I want to go back to before that. First, immediately, what was it that triggered your concerns that led you to getting checked out? What was the turning point?
Well, in retrospect, I think I noticed some mild memory issues going back maybe 6, 7 years, maybe a little longer. Comparing myself to my daughter and wife, we went on vacation last summer, for example, and they would remember all these details that I simply couldn't, remember. And then I had to retake my family practice board exam, and I studied for like 6 months, and the majority, 80% or more passed it, and I failed it, which was really a wake-up call. I said, how the heck did that happen? I graduated from med school, Alpha Omega Alpha, the top 2% of my class. So that was a real shocker. And so that kind of eventually led me to say, okay, what do we do? And, talking to my wife and my doctors, they recommended that I go to Mass General Hospital, one of the best hospitals in the world, actually. And I went through a full day of cognitive testing. It made your test look like kindergarten. They really put me through the mill. And then I had a brain MRI scan, I think before that showed significant brain shrinkage, much more so than you would expect for someone my age. And so they put all their final conclusion was the diagnosis of mild cognitive impairment, which again was pretty much a shocker for me. That's not something you want to hear.
And for those listening, the diagnosis of some level of dementia is made from cognitive function testing. That's what we do at Food for the Brain. And if it's not good, that's pre-dementia or mild cognitive impairment. If it's significantly not good, that could be a diagnosis of dementia. The diagnosis of Alzheimer's does require a brain scan. And when you see shrinkage of the brain, that's a very physical sign of an issue, which of course is what you've had. That must have been very worrying to get those results. How did you feel immediately after that? What happened?
Well, the brain scan, when I asked AI, AI, its opinion about people that have the results of my brain scan, it said you would typically be, severely cognitively impaired, probably in a nursing home. I said, well, I'm not quite there yet, but it was kind of a scary conclusion. And, it was fairly severe brain shrinkage. And, that really knocked me over, I would say.
And you were sharing earlier your global cortical atrophy score of 3, just for those who are familiar with this. So, some very solid pieces of evidence. Just before we go into what happened and what you did and where you are now, if you could, more wisely go back, a couple of years before your diagnosis, were there some very first notable signs? The reason I say that is the vast majority of people who get diagnosed ultimately with dementia, it's done because their partner tells the doctor that they're really quite seriously bad. In other words, most people, if asked, is your memory getting worse, post 60, will say, yeah, I think it is getting worse. So were there any signs that you think people should be acutely aware of and take more seriously to then get checked up? And of course, a very easy way is the cognitive function testing.
Right. I think you have to look at all the different forms of memory, short-term memory.
Mm.
For example, I had much more difficulty remembering names. People I met for the first time, I would never remember their name. And, I misplace things more often than I used to. Where did I leave my wallet, my keys, that sort of thing. And I attributed that, well, I'm getting older, blah, blah, blah. Um, I already mentioned the intermediate and long-term memory issues, like trying to remember what I did 2 weeks ago. We went out to dinner, and I would forget stuff that in the past I would easily remember. So it was just kind of a broad spectrum of memory issues. And my wife did comment at times. She's a physician. She's a workaholic. So she, where I spend more time with my daughter actually than I do with my wife. But it was even obvious to me that something wasn't quite right.
So these are really, really important signs for anyone who's listening to, pay attention to, and then get yourself tested objectively on a cognitive function test because it really, really does help. There's a very positive message in this whole podcast, which is that you have reversed that diagnosis. So as we get into that, what was the advice from Mass General Hospital? So now you have this diagnosis. What did they tell you to do?
Um, Follow up with your PCP. They didn't give me any real,
Yeah.
basically, they didn't give me any, they didn't think I needed any particular medications. They didn't give me any lifestyle recommendations, nothing, go talk to your PCP. And my PCP, well, control, I do have high blood pressure and high cholesterol. I'm taking meds for both of those. They said, keep doing that stuff, and nobody really had any sound advice for me.
So just to sort of cut to the results, recently you did the Food for the Brain cognitive function test, and it scores on a scale from red to orange to green, red, orange, yellow, green, actually. And if you're in the red, that's the mild cognitive impairment zone, and you are very clearly in the green. So you have reversed mild cognitive impairment. So here's the big question then. What did you do? Obviously, just dealing with the cholesterol and the blood pressure with
Well,
medication. Yeah.
I read your book for one thing. um,
That was Upgrade
yeah,
Your Brain. Was it Upgrade Your Brain then?
yes,
Yeah.
upgrade your brain.
Yeah.
And I already, when I read that book, which is really a fantastic book, I learned some new things. I was already aware of a lot of it because I spent much of my career studying the brain and cognition and diet and all these things. My main problem was I wasn't following my own advice. I would call it a lack of self-awareness.
Mm.
And, so I would cure patients and fix their brains, and I let my brain go in the toilet, which obviously wasn't very smart. So what it really took is two things: self-awareness, and then focusing on good information. And so I think the the uh, the shock of the diagnosis. And having an 11-year-old daughter that I want to see go to college, and all those things motivated me to. I said, I gotta get on top of this thing. I started doing what I knew in the past I should have been doing a long time ago, and I actually started doing it. And I looked for new information that I maybe hadn't come across.
So
And
starting off,
so,
yeah, starting off in the book, one of the big oversights that it pains me still exists is that we know that having a raised homocysteine above 10 means brain shrinkage, and it's lowered very, very easily with B vitamins. And the evidence for this is rock solid. So did you then get your homocysteine measured? Do you remember?
well, I knew that already. I mean, that wasn't new information for me, but yes, I've had as high as 17 in the past.
Hmm.
And that was measured when I knew high homocysteine was bad. So I
Mm.
would take B vitamins and TMG, L-methylfolate periodically on and off. Then I'd kind of, forget taking it. And again, it was a lack of self-awareness and self-control that caused me to drift. It wasn't a lack of information in that area particularly.
And have
But
you
I
driven
think,
your homocysteine level down now?
yeah, my last one was 6.
Well, that's perfect. Yeah, we always say that 7 is sort of the optimal zone. So you've gone from
And I think
17.
and same with my omega-3 issues. I think I sent you my last result on that.
Yeah, I
Um,
mean, just on the homocysteine, 7 or 6 is like perfect. 17 is high risk. You want to get below 10. You've done it. So tick that box. Yes. And then the next one is omega 3. And actually, it was one of the scientists in our group, Professor Bill Harris, who developed the omega 3 index. And you want to be certainly above 8%. Uh, what was your score recently?
um,
Think,
I
yeah, I have it
I
here actually.
sent
It's 11%. So 11% is really, really good. Uh, a lot of people in the UK and the US eating an average poor diet without fish, without omega 3 supplements, they will score maybe 4%. You get the lower the score, the increasing the rate of brain shrinkage. Above 8% is considered adequate. You're at 11%, which, by the way, is about the average of someone in Japan, and they eat a lot of fish there. So, do you both eat seafood and supplement omega 3? What do you do?
yes, I do both. I love like sardines, small fish, fatty fish. That's one of my favorite snacks now. A good friend of mine is Barry Sears. I don't know if you're familiar with Barry's own diet.
Ah, yeah, Barry's ears, absolutely. He woke us up to a
Yeah,
whole lot of things.
Barry and I email back and forth at probably every other day, and I've taught him a lot. He's taught me a lot. I take his brand of omega-3. I think it's really high quality. Um, so that's an area I've just learned I can't let this stuff slide. I have to stay on top of it.
Hmm. And it's a
And that's,
very
I think, the self-awareness issue.
It's a very easily doable thing either way. I mean, on the one hand, to have at
Right.
least 3 servings of oily fish a week plus supplement omega 3. What really, I speak to so many people about seafood, and some say, the sea's polluted. I don't want to eat fish. That's a very common response. And the sort of general dietetic advice is actually in the UK, the recommendation is to eat fish twice a week, once one oily. But where I live in South Wales, they found a 40,000-year-old complete Homo sapiens skeletal remains. Thought it was a woman because the skeleton had a necklace of shells and various basically shell jewelry. And then on DNA analysis, it turned out it was a man called Paviland Man, found in the Paviland cave. And that almost a fifth to a quarter of the diet was seafood. They found out from the bone analysis or marine food. So I kind of assume that our ancestors out there gathering food and water and wood and all the rest of it must have been exercising at least twice as much as us. So I would have to have almost half my diet as marine food to get to the kind of levels of omega 3, EPA and DHA. They're the most important omega
Right.
3s. So just having sardines twice a week is not enough. You really do need to
No.
both supplement and eat. Yeah, I didn't realize that most omega 3 is actually derived from anchovies. Did you know that?
I think I read that somewhere. Yes.
Yeah. So putting the odd anchovy in your food and some sardines and salmon and mackerel, all that stuff is really fantastic.
Well, my wife is Greek actually, and we have a home in Greece. So
Yeah.
I spend the summer there where it's much easier to find high quality seafood.
Mm. Gosh, the price of that Mediterranean fish has gone up a lot, hasn't it?
Yeah. Oh, yeah, it is.
Yeah. So there are a couple of real positives. Get the homocysteine down with B vitamins, get your omega 3s up. Let's look at some negatives or things we do too much of or too little of. So I want to ask you about alcohol and I want to ask you about exercise.
Well, through a good portion of my adult life, I drank alcohol, and at times I drank to excess. Especially when I was younger, and I can look back and make a lot of excuses for why I did that, but like most people that deal with alcohol issues, it's a bunch of BS. And finally, I don't know, I don't recall the exact moment where it hit my brain that, hey, you got to stop this. And, so I gave alcohol up completely, I don't know, 7, 8 years ago. And, I sense I think in your book, you said a little alcohol is possibly good or okay. I, my own personal feeling is that the ideal dose is zero.
Mhm.
If you want to have a little bit, it's probably not going to cause much of a harm, but I don't think there's any benefit. That's my opinion.
Yeah, I mean, there's a little bit of evidence that a small, and that means 125 mils, that is literally a small glass of red wine, that people who have that seem to have slightly less risk. But of course, there's very few people who stick to that.
Right.
What was your favorite tipple in the years leading up to your diagnosis?
Well, I sampled wine, you know, whiskey, vodka, ouzo. I tried everything,
Yeah.
whatever was around, I guess. And I was a closet drinker. I never drank, when I was working or, when driving, or I've never had a DWI, never any legal issues. But when I had an opportunity to safely drink to excess, I did.
Mhm.
And the only person I hurt was myself and, possibly my family. But, again, uh, lack of self-awareness, I think, was a big issue again. And, I look back and say, how could I be so stupid?
Mhm.
But, live and learn, as they say.
So now we know you've got your homocysteine under control, you've got the omegas and the seafood, you're not drinking. Tell us about exercise. Was that important for your recovery, so to speak?
Yes, I mean, and that's something that I've always, even, throughout my whole life, actually, I've exercised. So, I think when I look at the alcohol I was consuming, I should be dead. Um, but I was exercising and taking supplements and doing a bunch of other things that kind of countered the adverse effects of alcohol that your typical heavy drinker wasn't doing. Does that make any sense to you?
Yeah, it certainly
It,
does.
it's foolish, but I think that's the only reason I survived.
Yeah.
And when I quit drinking, and once I got the diagnosis, my exercise was kind of on and off. I wasn't being real compulsive about it. And since then, I've virtually 7 days a week I exercise,
So,
swimming,
yeah.
walking I've already walked on the treadmill earlier this morning. I lift weights. I have an exercise room in our house where I have a weight machine. I go to the gym. So yeah, exercise is huge in my opinion.
And how old are you, Bill?
77.
So you're 77 and half an hour a day exercise of one sort or another.
Well, no, up to
Yeah.
90 minutes a day on some days.
So 90 minutes a day. Fantastic. And
30 to 90 minutes. And what's interesting is I have a bad back, and I actually have an appointment tomorrow to have some injections in my back at a local pain clinic. And the guy was examining me. He says, "Holy smokes, you got severe kyphoscoliosis," which I do. My MRI scan looks like a pretzel. They told me 20 years ago that I'd be bedridden within a couple of years. And I said, no, not me. So exercise has saved me. I mean, you wouldn't believe how bad my back is, yet I don't restrict myself. I lift, I play sports, I do everything that, a normal person does because I'm active. Physical activity is the best medicine out there, in my opinion.
That's great to hear, and we know that the body muscle mass actually predicts brain mass. It's literally that. So building muscles is particularly good. So how did you change your diet?
Well, again, I've known what a healthy diet is, for many years, but I wasn't always following it. And when I was hit with this diagnosis, that was kind of a wake-up call. I basically, I would say I eat a Mediterranean diet with leaning towards at times ketogenic. Um, I supplement with medium chain triglyceride, MCT oil. I have 2 tablespoons every morning. I don't eat breakfast. I kind of do intermittent fasting, if you will, where I have a 6 to 8 hour eating window every day. And then I eat Mediterranean, typically keep the carbs pretty limited, try to avoid sugar as much as possible. Not completely, I'll have a dark chocolate here and there, that sort of thing. And if we go out to dinner, I'll eat a dessert with the family, but not very often. And as your book referenced Rob Lustig multiple times, right?
Yes, he's part of our group. Yes.
Yeah, and 2 weeks ago, Rob he contacted me. He wanted to have a Zoom meeting, and we spent 90 minutes discussing some of his new ideas. He wanted my input, which I find kind of strange that one of the top obesity experts in the world is calling up a simple country doctor to discuss his new ideas with. But I've known Rob for many, many years, and he loves my some of my crazy ideas.
Well, yes, you're being a little modest because you have a website which everyone should look at, which is carbsyndrome.com, as well as a book called The Brain Drain. So tell us a bit about carbsyndrome.com, which is one of your
Well,
crazy ideas.
again, it's kind of a weird story, but back at the beginning of the obesity epidemic in the 1970s, 1980s, where are all these obese people coming from? So what is obesity? And after med school, I worked with Franz Hallberg, who started the field of chronobiology. And so I had a scientific background. And obesity is excessive body fat. Okay. Well, the experts were telling us, yeah, that's true, but that's too hard to measure. Measure BMI, which what is BMI? It's a size measure. I can tell your size by looking at you. I don't need to measure anything to know what that is. But what does that tell you about body fat? Nothing. So actually, I wrote a letter to the editor to the New England Journal of Medicine in 1999, telling Willett and Al, who was promoting BMI, that you're full of BS, that BMI is worthless, and they published it. So anyway, long story short, I bought equipment in my little clinic in northern Minnesota, in the town where Bobby Dillon grew up. And I measured the body composition of every patient at every visit for decades. And I also belonged to Stephen Stahl's Neuroscience Education Institute, one of the foremost organizations for studying the brain. And so I was very familiar with brain stuff, and I started noticing this weird correlation between changes in body composition and certain brain symptoms. And, the symptoms would get worse, and within a week, 2 or 3 weeks, percent body fat would start to go up. If I figured out a way to suppress the symptoms within 2 to 3 weeks, those symptoms would start to decline. As a scientist, I thought, that's kind of weird. It sort of fit the pattern of a disease. And it's kind of a long story, but I eventually figured out it's ultra processed food affecting the brain in a way that disrupts the normal mechanisms for storing body fat. And these 22, I identified 22 brain dysfunction symptoms that seemed to fit this pattern. Then I stumbled across um, work by Hudson and Pope from um, Harvard, who came out with a concept called affective spectrum disorder. This was back in the latter part of last century. And they were claiming that 16 common brain disorders were actually part of the same disease.
Hmm.
And they were the same diseases that fit the symptoms I was recognizing. But their idea was so crazy that it died on the vine. If you look up ASD or affective spectrum disorder, here you can find it, but nobody's diagnosing it. No one's talking about it because they never figure out the triggers or the pathology or whatever. And I think I did. And the trigger is ultra processed food. The number one symptom is craving sweet and starchy food. And so when you develop this and you crave this food, you start consuming the very thing that's frying your brain.
Hmm.
And so that just pushes you down this pathway. And the other component of this is you'll start storing excessive body fat at virtually any caloric intake. You don't have to overeat. It pushes your brain into a fat storage mode. So you get two things. You get brain dysfunction and you get excessive body fat. And you go to your doctor and they say, oh, you're depressed. Here's Prozac. Or here, go on a diet. If you have carb syndrome, none of those things work. You got to know what the pathology is to treat it. And here's a good example. Do you know what atypical depression is?
Yes, I do. Yeah.
Okay. Well, we didn't have atypical depression back in my wife's culture in ancient Greece. There was no such thing. They had major depression.
Yeah.
People would get depressed. They'd withdraw from family and friends. They would lose their appetite and lose weight. If you didn't do that, you could not get the diagnosis. And it stayed that way for thousands of years until the 1970s, 80s. They started seeing a lot of people, hey, this guy looks depressed, but he has an increased appetite and weight gain. What's that all about? The guys at DSM are scratching their heads, sitting around drinking coffee, eating donuts. And they said, what do we do, guys? And well, it's sort of like, let's call this one atypical depression and the other one major depression.
Yeah.
No, no, no. That's carb syndrome. It has nothing to do with major depression.
And of
If you
course,
treat it like if you
yeah.
treat it like depression, you're going to make them worse.
And major depression, going back to my days as a psychologist, it would generally be more women, older, very light sleepers, having sleep problems, not, low appetite. And here we have, quote, atypical depression, which may now be more typical. Younger
Well,
people,
the majority of people being diagnosed now have atypical depression. The same is true with bipolar.
yeah,
Bipolar 2 is carb syndrome, in my opinion. It
younger,
has nothing to do
gaining
with
weight, craving carbs, feeling sleepy and groggy a lot of the time, tired. So, yeah, you mentioned the number one carb syndrome symptom, craving carbs and sugar. What are some of the other most common symptoms that you would put into this syndrome?
low moods, excessive anxiety, excessive mood swings, inability to concentrate and focus, internal restlessness, like people that sit in a chair and their legs shake, they have twitching legs and stuff like that. Um, um, other, poor sleep. Um, there's a bunch of those are I would say the majority of them.
And
Um,
anyone can go onto your website, carbsyndrome.com.
yeah, there's I list all 22 symptoms.
Yeah.
There's actually a blog post. If you look up 22 symptoms of carb syndrome, you
Mhm.
can read about all of them. But I don't. it's my crazy idea. It hasn't been accepted by the medical profession, and I don't care if it is. Even if I'm wrong, I think the concept has value because your book should be the Bible on how to reverse or treat carb syndrome. The only thing that's lacking, I would say, well, maybe it's not even lacking. The use of, you're familiar with fen-phen?
Yes.
I was the first doctor, I think, in the world to prescribe fen-phen in clinical practice.
Mhm.
And it was the way I used it was to reverse these brain dysfunction symptoms so I could get them to eat healthy and exercise and do all the things you needed to do to reverse it. And I combined it with a precursor supplement. I think you sell one that has 5-HTP, L-tyrosine, and
Yes.
chromium, that sort of thing.
Hmm.
That's the only supplement I sell. It's carb 22. It's
Hmm.
a precursor supplement, and you combine that with medications, boom, symptoms go away right away. I'd leave them on the meds for a very short period of time. Um, within a couple, 2 to 4 weeks, I would taper them off the meds, leave them on the supplement, and educate during that time, educate them like your book outlines, how to eat, how to exercise, supplements to take, learn to interact with others appropriately, adequate sleep. I would do all those things. And their brain would actually, they'd be capable of understanding what I'm saying and doing it. If you have carb syndrome, I could sit there and lecture you till the cows come home and you wouldn't be able to follow me because of your brain symptoms. Does that make sense?
It makes total sense. And I'd like to also remind listeners that earlier you mentioned that you have 2 tablespoons of MCT oil and give a little bit of a background to that, which is that the kind of insulin resistance that gets created from eating too many carbs has this strange effect that you actually, the brain gets starved of sugar, glucose. It gets starved. It doesn't get through. There's a sort of supply problem. And if your brain was starved of sugar, glucose, you can imagine it would send you a signal to eat more. I want sugar. I want carbs. So you mentioned that you have 2 tablespoons of medium chain triglyceride oil. And one of our group members is Professor Stephen Cunnane. And effectively, those brain cells, neurons, they love glucose for energy, but they also love ketones. And ketones are made from a type of medium chain triglyceride and principally from what's called C8 oil. And he has shown that if you give people with pre-dementia 2 tablespoons of this oil, their brain comes back to life. So we're not only talking about supplements like chromium, 5-HTP, and so on, which, if you like, tune up the system, but also about making sure that the brain actually has good, healthy fuel, both from slow releasing carbohydrates, less sugar, but also these 2 tablespoons of MCT oil. I think that,
I noticed in your book you talk about you do mention L-glutamine,
yes.
but I found that L-glutamine is um, actually one of its actions is it really helps suppress those cravings.
How much do you
And
take?
well, it's in my carb 22, but I take some extra. I take maybe an extra 1,000 milligrams a day,
Hmm.
sometimes more. Yeah, I mean, there's no limit. You can take tons of L-glutamine. It's not going to hurt you.
Yes.
Um, so
L-glutamine is that essential? It's one of the most abundant amino acids. L-glutamine. It's often used for gut problems in relation to leaky gut. 5 grams or 10 grams a day, 1 or 2 teaspoons. So having 1 gram and also what's in your carb 22 formula, a couple of grams a day. And yes, you remind me actually of the early evidence that it really helps to cut carb cravings. So it's very good to hear that that works for you and to remind others that L-glutamine can really help too.
well, and when I was in practice, I opened my practice in a little town in northern Minnesota, and I started using these principles to treat people, and the next thing I knew, I was having patients coming from the surrounding five-state area. I was inundated with patients because they thought I had a magic wand. You
Hmm.
know, Dr. Wilson can fix anybody. No, I didn't have a magic wand. I just had knowledge that other doctors didn't have. And, good knowledge is the key to health. And I wasn't focused so much on medications as, but I understood how to fix the brain so lifestyle actually would be effective, if that makes sense.
Indeed. And do you take any other supplements? I wanted to ask you about antioxidants, vitamin C, for example.
Well, I'm a Linus Pauling guy, okay?
Hmm.
Yeah, I take 2,000 milligrams of vitamin C. Um, I take polyphenol supplement actually, I take Dr. Sears Mackey Berry
Hmm.
supplement. What else do I take? Vitamin E,
Yeah.
vitamin D, vitamin K. I take, and then I take all the different choline supplements. I take a bunch of those.
I
I
think,
take a lot of supplements.
yeah, I think choline, those phospholipids, we make those neurons by combining the omega-3 DHA principally to the phospholipid done by methylation, which depends on B vitamins. You also wanted me to ask you about lithium. There's been a lot in the papers recently about lithium. What's your
Well, I think we need more studies on it, but there's some interesting work on lithium orotate
Mm.
that I think I take 5 milligrams twice daily. It's well tolerated. I think it's quite safe. So I think, when it comes to supplements, I look at safety because we don't have good research on a lot of supplements because nobody can make money on them, the pharmaceutical companies. So you have to kind of look at the safety profile, I think is the number one thing.
Mm.
And lithium's one that I think is quite safe, and I wouldn't have any problem recommending it.
I was a student of the late Dr. Carl Pfeiffer, from the Brain Biocenter in New Jersey. And yes, because lithium, of course, is used in high dose for bipolar. And it was his view, and he was a major mineral man, pretty much put zinc on the map as far as the brain is concerned. Yeah, he considered lithium was probably an essential element, possibly lacking from our refined diet, but also possibly geographically lacking because some
Right.
areas the soil contains lithium, other areas it doesn't. So yeah, lithium's definitely on the interesting list now. And
I take I take zinc every day.
you also wanted me to ask you about sauna.
Yeah, I think there's again we could use better studies. I have an infrared sauna in my basement that I hadn't been using regularly. Just I was too busy, and how that goes. And now I try to hit the sauna at least 4 times a week for 30 to 40 minutes, because there is pretty good data that that's good for your brain. I don't know what is your read on that?
Well, I think, yeah, it's, always we're looking at studies, and there's a very good study of Finnish men, and they pretty much had half the risk of dementia if they were having 4+ sauna bathing sessions a week. It made me smile because I'm about 2 weeks off finishing building a wood-fired salt box sauna next to an eco pool. So it's
Excellent.
here in the UK, it's February. I actually live in the Black Mountains of Wales. It just is raining every day. It's been a miserable winter. So I can't wait to light up get that fire burning, jump in the sauna. And there may be two parts to this. So certainly the evidence, and we're not looking at proven causation. We're looking at association. The evidence is good. Saunas are good for you, but it may not just be sauna. It could also be, sauna and then a cold plunge. So it's because I was talking to the wonderful Professor Jonathan Stone, and he was really saying that so much of what makes us stronger is that if it doesn't kill you, it makes you stronger. It's like intermittent fasting, sometimes eating,
Right.
sometimes not. Exercise. I mean, let's face it, if you actually look at the effect of exercise immediately, it raises your blood pressure. So you say, you don't want to have high blood pressure. Why would you do it? But the answer is after exercise, your body recovers. You have to tear muscle to build muscle. So the whole concept really of resilience. In other words, you get very hot, you jump in the cold water, you get cold, back in the sauna. So whether it's just the heat or whether it's partly this change, I don't know. So we'll have to wait and see, because I guess your infrared sauna, it's not quite the same as you don't jump in a cold plunge pool after it.
Well, we have one of those cold tanks at the health club I go to, but I just can't get myself to do it. I just that's something I'm not going to do.
Yeah,
I
yeah,
mean, we just got 2.5 feet of snow here last week, and I shoveled out a two-car driveway by hand. I don't have a snowblower,
yeah.
and so I think I got my cold exposure.
You've done your cold, on with the infrared. And how's your hearing, Bill? Have you had any?
Well, yeah, that was the other thing is uh, somewhere I read that hearing was an issue with dementia. So well, I better get my hearing tested. Well, as it turns out, I have significant hearing loss. So I purchased, it cost me $6,000.
Wow.
The brand is Phonex. It's one of the top brand of hearing aid you can get. Insurance paid for some of it, but I really love them. I mean, it's amazing what I was missing before. And there's just tons of evidence that hearing loss, is adversely affects brain function. So that's another thing I've done that I think is really helping.
Yeah, it's poignant for me. I'm all about a decade behind you. I'm turning 68 next month, and there's no question my hearing is worse in one ear. So I'm off to get checked, and it's very interesting, isn't it? Because in a sense, wearing glasses is almost cool, almost sexy. So glasses have kind of become a fashion item, no problem at all. But I must admit, my vanity, I'm not immediately wanting to, have a visible hearing aid as such, but I realize it's something that I probably am going to have to do.
Well, like I said, I'm 77 with an 11-year-old daughter. That's another story. But um, they keep mistaking me for her grandfather when I drive her to the school. Oh, your grandfather brought you to school. Not quite, but yeah, I think that you got to get your hearing checked. I had another question. Reading your book, you mentioned I think progesterone. You were talking about progesterone, but what about pregnenolone? That's another supplement I take regularly.
Well, yeah, I mean,
I,
that's the sort of precursor for progesterone, isn't it?
right, right.
Yeah. I
Do
mean, we
you
go
think that's
from,
a good idea?
well, yeah, I think that this is an area because basically the background to this is all men and all women produce or should testosterone and the estrogens and progesterone. And they are generally neuroregenerative, so they're important for rebuilding those connections in the brain. Now, the starting material is actually cholesterol. So we make all of it
Right.
from cholesterol. So you don't want to drive your cholesterol so low that you've got no cholesterol. And then pregnenolone, and then progesterone. So from progesterone, you can make all the estrogens and the testosterone and DHEA and so on. And from progesterone, we also make cortisol. which is the stress hormone. So one of the problems is, someone's progesterone deficient and highly stressed, which means a lot of cortisol production, then, that's going to deplete these other hormones. And we know very clearly in women that there is this increased risk post-menopause of cognitive decline. And it's looking pretty consistent that, post-menopause, when progesterone production really goes down, that women are taking bioidentical hormones, progesterone, maybe a little testosterone, estradiol, and so on. Pregnenolone, of course, is the precursor for all of it. So that would be a very safe bet. I mean, immediately, if you have pregnenolone, you can make progesterone, and then you can make everything else. So that's a really good sort of all-rounder. And I think the evidence for men potentially being deficient in these hormones is also emerging. And I think men don't think about that. Somehow hormones seems to be thought of as a territory of women, and replacing that lack of testosterone, progesterone, or whatever. I think
Actually,
yeah.
that's one thing I've been take. I use a testosterone gel every day
Hmm.
daily.
Hmm.
So,
And
I
and have you noticed the effect of that? I mean, how long have you been?
yes, I think so. I think it helps my um mood, strength. Because when I tried stopping it, I felt more tired and
Mm.
didn't seem to have quite the energy. So, it's something that I'm very pleased with. I was going to ask you too in your book, you mentioned the importance of magnesium, but you didn't really talk about the different forms because I think there's 8 different forms of magnesium,
Hmm.
and the one that's really good for the brain is the magnesium L-threonate,
Hmm.
the neuromag, and that's one I take every day. What is your opinion about that?
Yes. And how much do you take?
Um, I'd have to go look at the bottle. It's just one capsule. I can't remember what the dose is. And I take another one that's has, I think, all 8 forms of magnesium in one, you
Yeah.
know, pill. I take one of those a day and one magnesium L-threonate.
Yeah, no, I mean, I think that's fantastic and a good form. I also love magnesium ascorbate, just kills two birds with one stone, so to speak. I do remember years ago, and I'm not saying this is, my view, but just to contextualize this. Do you remember Burton Altura, Professor Burton Altura? He did all the original work on magnesium. An amazing fellow. He had 3 professorships. I think pathology, medicine, chemistry, biochemistry. I mean, a real genius with this ton of one of the main advisors, consultants in the National Institute of Health, and he put magnesium on the map back in something like the 80s, and at that time even achieved getting a few $1 million to educate doctors. And when the money ran out and the education ran out, everything went back to zero. Nobody knew about magnesium. And some years ago, probably 10 now, I was talking to someone at a cocktail party in the West End, talking about this amazing scientist. It was his friend, and I said, "You don't mean Burton Altura?" He said, "Yeah." Anyway, it turned out I was going to New York, and I contacted him, and we had dinner. And I was waxing lyrical about this form of magnesium or that form of magnesium, mainly for cardiovascular disease in that context, and saying that I always give 300 milligrams of magnesium to anyone with any cardiovascular concerns. And I think the brain and the heart are just interconnected. So 300
Well,
milligrams
yeah.
is good for the heart, it's good for the brain as well. And he said, "Patrick, I watch in my laboratory magnesium ions going in and out of those, muscle cells in the arteries, which is what if you get a lack of magnesium, the muscle contracts, your blood pressure goes up. If you get more magnesium, less calcium, it goes down. One of the major drugs for blood pressure are calcium channel blockers. So you either get more magnesium in, which is easy, cheap, free, non-patentable, or you block the channel so you get less calcium in, which is patentable and a drug." And
Right.
he said they all work. I mean, he said, make sure you get 300 milligrams because I'm watching all these different forms of magnesium. they do work. So I'm sure some are better than others, no question. But I think the most important thing, the big thing to underline is the magnesium. It's well worth making sure if you have any brain problems or heart problems, getting in the order of 300 milligrams of magnesium. And by the way, it's, as you know, it's rich in greens, it's rich in seeds. So it's richest in green seeds, like pumpkin seeds. And I don't know if you remember the days of X Factor, where
Right.
the detective, who has sort of extrasensory perception, he's always snacking on pumpkin seeds, pumpkin seeds, pumpkin seeds. So I've always thought pumpkin seeds would be a good source of magnesium.
Yeah,
So,
I'm a big seeds and nuts are an important part of my diet.
and by the way, you very kindly sent me the results of your latest cognitive function test from foodforthebrain.org. And not only do you get the actual measure of your cognitive function, which was superb in the green, 60, 61, I think, but also from the questionnaire about diet and lifestyle. If you're doing everything wrong, you would score 100%. And if you're doing everything right, you'd score closer to zero. We love people to be down in the 30s. And that's where you are. You have a
And
low.
and actually, when I did that thing, I put in the incorrect dose of B vitamins.
Mhm.
I under I
Yeah.
didn't have my bottles with me when I did it, so I went back and looked. I said, "Whoops, I put the wrong
Uh,
numbers in there." So
but
it would have been higher, actually, I think,
yeah, but
or lower.
you've gone from someone who a little over 2 years ago was diagnosed with mild cognitive impairment and significant brain shrinkage, who now has a superb cognitive function score, well out of the danger zone, and you've changed all the diet and lifestyle factors, so your risk based on diet and lifestyle is very, very low. Well done. That's a
And
result.
I blog. I just finished I'm just finishing a second book to be called Brain Saver.
Hmm.
Um, so I think I'm doing okay. Considering where I was headed, I'm almost, in a way, I'm a little bit ashamed of how badly I let myself go. But life is. I'm reading. I think I told you I'm reading "Can't Hurt Me" by David Goggins. It's a really good book. I recommend, about a guy that started, in poverty, and he's a black guy that lived in the ghetto, and how he pulled himself up, and his challenges in life, and how he got knocked down and he got back up, and it's all about self-awareness. Know yourself, know your strengths, know your weaknesses, and act on that information. And I think that's what saved me, is self-awareness. If I didn't have that, I'd be dead. And so that allowed me to say, okay, I need to keep learning, reading. I've been reading a lot more books lately. That's why I read your book, and I've read other books on the brain. You can never learn enough, I guess, is how I look at things.
Well,
And
you are a wonderful example, and inspiring to so many people who will hear your story, and hopefully it's a wake up call, and certainly
well, and
to.
it's never too late to turn the ship around. That's my message.
Yeah, that's so important. And how can people stay in touch with you? Is it through the website, carbsyndrome.com? Is that where you'll put up any new publications? And
Yeah, I'm also on Substack, the Carb Syndrome on Substack.
Mhm.
Um, actually, I'm starting I have some people I'm working with upgrading my website, and I'm going to be taking appointments for counseling people on how to fix their brain. People that
Fantastic.
want to sign up, there would be like a free session where I would talk to them, and then if they want to proceed with a paid consultation, I would, 30 to 60 minutes or whatever, where I would teach them about, all the things we're talking about today.
That's fantastic. I'd like you to be my doctor, Bill.
Well, I think I have good, my goal is to share information because I think I have information that nobody else has. And here's a good example. I talk about it. It's something called communication lag time. And when you're communicating, we can't do it because we're not looking at each other. But when you're talking with someone directly, human beings, we look at each other's faces, right?
Hmm.
And when I say something, it takes, a little bit of time for your brain to process what I just said. And if I say something, your brain will process it. There'll be a little bit of a head nod or blink or something telling me subconsciously that you process what I said so I can say something else.
Hmm.
And so that's how I call that the communication lag time. It's less than a second, very short. And that's how people know when to talk and when to, wait a little bit. And that's sort of the back and forth of a conversation. And people with carb syndrome, I started noticing their communication lag time would go 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. You know, and it's a very sensitive measure of brain function. And then when I treated them, their communication lag time would quickly go back to normal. Now, I've never heard anybody describe that or talk about it, but I use it. I've used it treating patients. It's very, it's a very useful marker of brain function, and it's something that if you really pay attention next time you talk to someone, see if you can pick up on that.
That's fascinating. I mean, that's actually a very simple thing to measure. I can see lots of different ways that that could be useful. Well, Bill, your brain is clearly working, and thank you so much for getting it back into good shape so you can share all your wisdom with all of us. And thank you very, very much for coming on my podcast and sharing your important.
Well, and I would highly recommend folks out there to read your book. I know you've written a bunch of books. This is the only one I've read to date, but I think it's an excellent book. And it's really a roadmap of how to prevent or reverse what I call carb syndrome. Um, and it's well written, scientifically sound. I just think it's a no-brainer.
This is thank you so much. This is the book Upgrade Your Brain, published by HarperCollins, available through the charity foodforthebrain.org. And my latest book actually is Alzheimer's Prevention is the Cure, which goes a little bit more deeply into just that topic. But I'm so glad that you read that, and most importantly, it helped you to make the right choices and got your brain back in action. So thank you very much for being my podcast.
Well, thank you for taking the time to discuss this with me.